Hello, this video is on Ted Bundy. There will be some graphic content discussed, so beware. But with all that said, I hope you enjoy, and thanks for watching. Though Ted Bundy made the conscious decision to have murdered at least 36 women, this video will try to prove his actions were strongly influenced by his upbringing and mental state, and that he murdered as a means to an end for the control of others. I will do this by showing evidence of trauma, societal impact, and other factors in Ted Bundy's life that led him to commit murder. Ted Bundy became familiar with trauma at an early age. Quote, Bundy, who was born to a single mother, spent the first 3 years of his life with a violent and frightening grandfather who would kick dogs, swing cats by their tails, beat people who angered him, and read pornography voraciously. Unquote. For the first 3 years of Bundy's life, he was exposed to bad behavior. Some of Bundy's earliest memories involved the abuse of animals and other people. Ted was allegedly the product of incest between Bundy's mother, Louise, and grandfather, Samuel. He was told growing up that his grandparents were his actual parents, and that Louise was his sister, but Bundy always felt that she was his real mother. Bundy's childhood played a major role in his life and the decisions he made. His aunt said that Ted would lay knives down next to her while she was sleeping. A slightly older Ted Bundy tortured many animals, mostly cats and dogs. Around age 3, Bundy and his mother moved away from Ted's grandfather. His mother got married, and then the two of them and Bundy's new stepfather lived together. Bundy in his teen years, besides having tortured animals, liked to steal and act out. He did not get along with others and had little to no friends. Bundy's childhood showed a pattern of reoccurring actions that most serial killers did when they were young. Quote, Stone's 2007 study of 111 men who killed their wives compared with 141 who committed serial sexual homicide found animal torture to be significantly more common among the serial killers. Unquote. Research over several decades showed Ted Bundy's habit of animal cruelty as a precursor in serial killers. This was also found in other serial killers, such as Ed Kemper, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Dennis Rader. Bundy, like other serial killers, lacked all moral judgment from an early age, and he eventually went after people instead of animals. Besides animal cruelty being prevalent in most serial killers' early lives, intense trauma has also been experienced by many serial killers. Before his execution, Bundy spoke to a radio host about things he had seen as a child that changed him. Bundy blamed his demented fantasies on pornography, which he would find in stores, but also true crime magazines, which he found in people's garbage bins. Bundy stated that he became addicted to those graphic images and sought them out regularly. Later in life, Ted often stole the things he wanted and drank alcohol. He also explained that alcohol, as well as pornography, affected him in similar ways, such as blurring the line between fantasy and reality. Bundy experienced things that had long-lasting effects on him psychologically. Quote, the events became traumatic when they damage or shatter individuals' worldviews by confronting individuals with experiences and information that are incongruent with previous assumptions. Unquote. Bundy's worldviews were based on these traumatic experiences in his life, not sadistic fantasies. His sadistic fantasies could have been blamed solely on his family for not parenting him, like how the parents of the Columbine shooters were blamed because they raised mass murderers. Before his execution, Bundy talked about his home life and said that it was a normal Christian home, but this was later disputed by a psychiatrist involved with Bundy. He then admitted that he was to blame for his murders, but his desire to do so stemmed from the traumatic things that he witnessed growing up. Ted was an average student in high school. He played sports and was a B student. In college, he failed several times. He had bad attendance and bad grades, and often switched universities and majors. He got involved in acting classes, but could not attend because he failed his other classes. Eventually, Ted switched his major to psychology and improved his overall academic status. Bundy wanted to go into law, but every law school that applied to turned him down. Bundy failed constantly at his school life and the many part-time jobs that he had acquired. Those failures, combined with his bad social life, he was at a loss. Ted became extremely depressed throughout this process. Bundy's only rewarding outlet was his vices. Bundy wanted to be seen as an intellectual scholar. He learned how to be likable and fake emotions. Ted seemed very well put together because he worked at being that way. He liked to be around vulnerable people and got small amounts of authority and status from different programs. Bundy helped in a political campaign. This fed his ego by giving him political connections and made him feel more important. He helped put together a rape prevention program, and he also worked on a suicide hotline. Eventually, quote, he joined the Mormon Church and provided Sunday school classes for children. He waited a little more than a month before he began killing women in the region, unquote. Weeks before Bundy killed his first victim, he was in a room full of children, teaching them the Mormon faith. He seemed to have many different times in his life that he tried to be a good person. He was probably trying to change, but his mental state was already warped and he could not help himself. Bundy put himself in situations where he would feel good about himself, and that gave him opportunities to take advantage of helpless people. After he was rejected by several law schools, Ted worked at a hospital with psychiatric patients. His motives were possibly for his gain. Quote, Bundy confessed to 30 murders, yet he also has been implicated in at least 20 other murders by the authorities. Moreover, without much corroborating evidence, some relatives of missing women are sure that their loved ones were killed by Bundy. Unquote. To have murdered at least 30 people, there would have had to be something wrong with Bundy's mental state. Ted Bundy's mental state was altered by the amount of trauma in his life. From this, he lacked empathy and remorse. He was amoral towards his actions and therefore did not care about the lives of others. Amorality is not uncommon. Many people do bad things without caring what it does to people. Bundy was a typical psychopath and a sadist. He did not function in society as most people did. Quote, psychopaths appear to be violent for a variety of reasons, failing to attend another's distress cues, overreacting to perceived aggression, or as a means to a goal, unquote. Bundy was amoral because he needed to achieve control. Most psychopaths have not committed violent crimes. They thrive in positions of power. Bundy did the same, except was amoral and killed people. During Bundy's execution, hundreds of people gathered outside, carried signs, and passed out shirts that expressed their hate for Bundy. They had a good reason to be excited about the execution, but they participated in something immoral. This correlated with society's fascination with serial killers. Since Jack the Ripper terrorized London, every serial killer has been looked at as a movie villain, and many people were intrigued by those murderers. People were interested in Ted Bundy for the same reason that they liked detective movies. There were key differences between Ted Bundy and Jack the Ripper. Jack was never caught. His murders happened within a mile of each other, and all of his victims were prostitutes who knew each other. Jack the Ripper mutilated his victims' bodies, but he did nothing sexual. It was theorized that he was a sophisticated person, possibly a surgeon. On the other end, Bundy bludgeoned women so that he could spend time with them. mutilate, and then engage in necrophilia. They both murdered, but Bundy did it to gain control. Jack's reason was theorized to be out of anger towards society or for misogynistic reasons, but since his victims were less desirable people, he could have possibly held them to a lower standard than non-prostitutes, unlike how Bundy held all human life at the same level as animals. Bundy grew up as an amoral person. He did not understand the emotions of others and therefore could not properly weigh the morality of murder. He was unconcerned with the consequences of his murders. Bundy was educated and had an interest in psychology. He used this to rationalize murder as something he would ethically be okay with. Quote, "And I quickly discovered that the greatest obstacle to my freedom, the greatest block and limitation to it, consists in the insupportable value judgment that I was bound to respect the rights of others." Unquote. Ted convinced himself that his murders were justified because all actions are value judgments, and all value judgments are subjective. Part of his reason for this was that he did not believe a person's life could be more valuable than an animal's life. He did not think that he should have given up the pleasure of murdering a person, but not an animal. Bundy murdered as a means to an end for the control of others. He never had full control of his own life. He had a bad home life, did not fit in at school, failed several college classes, and was rejected from every school that he applied to. The only time that he felt in control was when he murdered someone. He would often return to his victims' bodies and engage in necrophilia. Bundy's crimes were hypersexual, but his urges were psychological. He captured and murdered people so that he could be in control of their bodies. Ted Bundy's love of necrophilia originated in his obsession with death and control of others. When Ted killed animals when he was younger, he did not do it just to kill them. He did it so he could mutilate their dead bodies. He was obsessed with death, and it was the same when he murdered people. Bundy wanted bodies to himself so he could do whatever he wanted to them and be in full control. Quote, "I interpret necrophilia as obsession with death, where obsession means a state of disordered thinking in which death is confused as love, the perversion of eros and thanatos, a perversion that robs death of dignity." Unquote. What this showed in Ted's obsession with death is that his reality was altered. His lifelong feeling of loneliness was put aside when he was engaged in necrophilia. He could not feel love from living human beings and preferred them to be dead because he felt a connection. This all came from the trauma he carried with him since he was a young child. Bundy witnessed his grandfather hurt animals, so he eventually did the same, and no one stopped him. He went out of his own and tortured small animals because it made him feel in control. Quote, "The use of the date rape drug is necrophilic in that it silences the victim, and perverted in that it robs the victim and the sexual act of dignity, and indicates how necrophilia makes perversion normative by silencing resistance and outrage." Unquote. Bundy could have used date rape drugs to get a similar outcome to killing to engage in necrophilia. He did not. Because of his mental state, he was obsessed with death. This came from his traumatic experiences of seeing animals abused and the amount of pornography that he consumed as a child. Bundy was predisposed to death and hypersexuality, which is the main influence in why he murdered people and would hang around their corpses to fulfill his lifelong fantasies. All of Bundy's victims were white females who were mostly in college or already graduated from college, and his youngest victim was 12. Many of them looked similar to Bundy's ex-girlfriend, which would show a psychological vulnerability in Bundy. It helped to profile Ted Bundy because of the circumstances, and Bundy's ex eventually became suspicious of him because of a sketch drawing that looked like Bundy. He murdered for 17 years while driving across the country on several different occasions. He drove a Volkswagen Bug and would bring along a murder kit that he put together. Inside were materials used for bondage: blades, handcuffs, ski mask, gloves, a crowbar, and flashlight, and a few other items. Bundy stalked his victims and bludgeoned them. He would then mutilate the bodies and bite them. If the corpse was in a secluded location, then Bundy would return to the body to engage in necrophilia. Quote, when he was most in control, he was able to channel that anger into pre-planned assaults in which his victims simply disappeared. He visited them at their final dump sites for sexual thrills, even as the forest animals gnawed away their flesh, and experienced the thrill of his anger expressed as total control. Unquote. Bundy had a well thought out process in which he picked his victims, murdered them, allowed himself time with the victims' corpses, and left the scene without being caught. This showed how far Ted Bundy was willing to go to have complete control over others. By doing this, he fed the physical needs and psychological needs that he acquired from trauma. In conclusion, Ted Bundy murdered at least 30 women, and he was executed for it. He grew up as a troubled child that could not relate to others or understand their feelings. He killed small animals and graduated to people. Bundy was a sadist and a psychopath who knew murder was immoral according to society, but he did not feel that human life was more important than his pleasure of doing it. He was successful for 17 years because on the surface he was charismatic, well put together, likable person. His true identity was kept hidden from the people close to him. Bundy was to blame for the murders, but his traumatic life, failures, and mental state are what made him obsessed with death and to be in control. Alright, so that's the end of the video. This is an essay I wrote a few years ago, but I hope you liked it, and if there's anything to learn from this is raise your kids better, I guess. Yeah, and don't be mean to animals, especially in front of your kids. It's gonna affect them. Everything you do in front of the kids affects them. How you act, what you say, even when you're putting them away in their room so you can yell at your spouse in the other room. They can hear. They might not hear the words, but they hear the level of your voice, and that has an effect as well. So, all right. Hope you liked it, and see you in the next video.